Hello, hello. Whew. Summer. Okay, so I finished it. Nature's Metropolis, Chicago in the Great West by William Cronon. Look at this motherfucker. Okay, so I'm very proud of myself. It took me like a month, but I did do it through gradual chipping away every day at this tome, which, I mean, actually, it's like not even 400 pages, but whatever. Okay, so this is a nonfiction book, obviously. It's about, put that there, the relationship between Chicago as it grew and its hinterland, that is the parts of the country that supplied it with lumber, grain, other raw materials that Chicago then made into stuff and sold, both to the west and to the east. And how the city grew in the 19th century, and how the idea of the rural countryside also grew, because prior to that point, when Chicago didn't exist, neither did all of the farms of, you know, of Iowa, of Nebraska, whatever. It was all just prairie. So yes, this is an interesting book. It's from like 1991, and the guy who wrote it has some definite interest in environmentalism, but also in like the ecology of the place. But yeah, I mean, it's largely about those things that I've said. It's got a whole chapter on grain and on meat and on lumber, one chapter for each, and that's like a fucking third of this book is just that. And it is really interesting to read about the ties between Chicago and the Great West, which is defined as sort of all of the country from the Appalachians to the Pacific at one point. So I thought it was really good. Like, I have, in the last few years, really enjoyed reading books about Chicago history, and I think Goodreads recommended me this one to look at, and occasionally Goodreads has good recommendations for nonfiction for me, so it must have caught my eye on the screen, and I went, oh hey, that does sound interesting, you're right, and then was happy to find it at Half Price Books kind of randomly. I wasn't looking for it, but I'm dying. No, I really enjoyed it. I thought that he did just like a really good job of talking about all of these details, of making it interesting. I mean, I never understood like what the Chicago Board of Trade really did, where it grew from, what the futures exchange really was, and how all of those stuff interconnected. There's a lot of interesting stuff about the Granger movement in this as well, and the sort of animosity that grew up between the city and the country, and how so much of that just comes from like a misunderstanding about how like these systems work, and how, yet at the same time, how once the system developed and did work, it obscured its own connections. But anyway, yeah, so I definitely add this to like my list of interesting books about Chicago that I would totally recommend if you're interested in the history of Chicago, or in the history of the country, or in the history of cities kind of in general, because a lot of this can be applied to really any city in the United States to some degree. Yeah. I guess I'll leave it there. It's also got pictures, so that's nice. I mean, it's also got bankruptcy maps. Yeah, so yeah, definitely recommend this. Hello. Oh boy. I have to talk about Wilder Girls, okay? I don't know how I feel about this book. I pretty much just read it because it was available on Libby, and I'd heard a few people talk about it, and I thought, well, okay, that sounds kind of interesting. Like, the premise is it's about this girls' school on an island in New England that gets some sort of weird plague that causes everyone to start kind of having body horror things happen to them, almost like they're abortively evolving, but none of it actually like goes very far or has any kind of real function. Okay, so I was like, that sounds kind of interesting, I guess. I don't know how I feel about this. Okay, so some of it I did like. I can say I definitely liked some of it. The horror, kind of like the gore stuff, I thought was, you know, I thought that was fairly well done, I guess. I don't read much horror or much really gory stuff. Actually, it wasn't until quite near the end that any of it actually really grossed me out. I think we all have our very particular squicks, like when it comes to what we find disgusting. So for me, like, a lot of the things in this book would have grossed me out if I had, like, been looking at them, but I wasn't. But, so, you know, so I was mostly like, that's nasty, but it wasn't really affecting me. I don't know, I just kind of never connected that much with the characters, I think was the biggest problem. And I wish I did, because, like, the main character is constantly making bad decisions, and ultimately it's sort of her fault that everything goes downhill and ends as badly as it does. But I don't know, there were all these parts where I was just like, can you stop thinking about yourself for 35 seconds? And then, like, toward the end, they, well, spoilers, but they essentially, like, leave everybody else to die on this island, which I'm not arguing they shouldn't have done that, but they didn't even think about it. Like, it was never acknowledged that they were making the decision, like, we can't save everyone, we're going to have to just leave and let them all get bombed and die. And, like, like, think about it for, like, 2 seconds. And then make your, you know, actually make a decision rather than being like, And I didn't really care that much about the different characters, really. Like, the major characters, okay, sure, we got to know them. But everybody else, like, I wish there had been more about the other students, I think. Like, there was some, but it didn't feel like a community, I guess, in the way that I would want. And I don't know, I liked that the main character was, I think, bisexual. This is not 100% explicit, but I think that was the case. And I like that the character that she kind of almost has a thing with is queer, and, you know, so I like that kind of, that stuff, but that's, like, minor, you know. Overall, I'm like, this is an interesting premise, but it just doesn't hold together in all of the places where I would need it to. And I don't know, Hetty, the main character, Hetty, it always took her so long to figure shit out, where I was sitting there like, come on, dude. Hell, there was one time where she got to something and I was like, wait, you didn't realize that? What the fuck? Like, I just assumed that we were on the same page, but I guess not. But, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there's anything I can really point to that's, like, an actual negative and isn't just the way I felt. But I'm kind of, I guess I'm, like, so-so on it. Like, it was fine. It was fine. I didn't hate it. No, not at all. I just kind of, the positives and negatives kind of outweighed each other, you know? Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah, that's what I'm gonna say about it. Good enough. Hello. I have finished another book. Okay. The Great SF Stories, Volume 15. So this is part of a series of collections of science fiction short stories that they're supposed to be the best of their year, according to Isaac Asimov and Martin Greenberg. And this is Volume 15 is stories from 1953. It's the only one I've ever, you know, seen or read, but if I do come across other ones, I would be, like, very happy to read them as well. I also love this cover. It's got kind of this like spaceship that's almost an old wreck. It continues onto the back too. It's almost an old wreck, kind of falling apart, derelict, and then there's like a new shiny little one flying by. Okay, so this book is great, obviously. It's great sci-fi stories from 1953. Don't, you know, please don't notice that they're all by white men. Well, okay, I'm making an assumption that they're all white, but they're definitely all men. But whatever. That's so often par for the course with older science fiction. I'm kind of used to it. It's annoying, but I'm used to it. And it had some really great stories. Some of them, I guess, I didn't find particularly memorable, but it did have a variety of different stuff happening. Some of the stories were funny, some of them were creepy. It had The 9 Billion Names of God by Arthur C. Clarke, which is, like, in my opinion, the best sci-fi short story that I have ever read. If you've never read it, like, do yourself a favor, man. Read it. The 9 Billion Names of God. It's like 5 pages long. It'll take you a minute, but, like, read it. I also really enjoyed... I'm so bad at remembering what goes with each title. Ah! I thought the Hall of Mirrors by Frederick Brown was interestingly creepy. It's a Good Life by Jerome Bixby, very creepy. One of the fun things in this book is that Asimov and Greenberg write little like introductions for each story, explaining kind of who the author is and putting a little bit of context of like why they picked it or what they liked about it. They also have an introductory chapter where they just kind of go through what was happening in 1953. This was published in the 80s, so that also gives a certain, I don't know, context to what they chose. And they list all of the, you know, they list each of the authors with the year they were born and died. So many of these guys are probably dead by now and are not dead when this book was published. Kind of sad. But it's just like a variety of people I've heard of and a few people I hadn't. Like Arthur C. Clarke, Fritz Leibert, James Blish, Theodore Sturgeon, Alfred Bester, Walter M. Miller Jr., Philip K. Dick, Jerome Bixby. Those are most of the ones I've heard of. And then the other guys I was like, whomst? But that's fine. Yeah, so, like, I totally recommend this kind of collection, even if not specifically this one. Like, anything like this. I didn't, you know, until I found this book, I think at Half Price Books, I didn't know that something like this existed, and it's just, I love short story anthologies, and I love sci-fi short stories, and I love that through the decades people have made concerted efforts to, like, reprint these old stories that had been published in, like, all the various sci-fi periodicals, most of which I suppose don't even exist anymore, and, like, you know, making these things easier to find. I will say that I would really like to get my hands on something that is similar to this, but focuses more on, like, older sci-fi published by women or by people of color, because, like, that's just not a thing that a lot of these collections focus on. But they must have existed. Like, there must be some out there if somebody did a little digging. So... it was really good. I also, I don't know about Greenberg, but I kind of wonder if Asimov ever put any of his own short stories into these collections. Like, were they just like, can we do that? Like, because some of his short stories are fantastic, but I don't know. So anyway, if I ever come across another book in this series, I would like totally be on board. I should look it up, I guess. I haven't, but I'm curious as to how far they got. There's kind of a jokey bit in one of the Asimov parts where he talks about how, like, he's done the math, and if they publish 2 of these a year, by 2050 they will be at 2050, you know? So, like, that's when they'll line up, which obviously, yeah, wasn't gonna ever happen, but it does make me wonder, like, how long they continue doing this. I don't remember when Asimov died. In the 90s, I think? But anyway, they got as far as 15, and I'm pretty sure they got further than that, so I have talked too long about this little tiny book, but I really enjoyed it. Alright, let's talk about The Best Bad Things by Katrina Caruso. I quite liked it. I think I kind of started off liking it more than I ultimately ended up liking it, but the beginning at least was just this really fun breath of fresh air. This one I listened to, by the way. It was in present tense, which I don't love, but at least it was in third person. But okay, so basically it's about a woman in the, oh boy, 19th century post-Civil War, and I'm not entirely sure what year it was, even though they said it a lot. I'm just not sure. I think it may have been the 1880s, but don't quote me. And she used to be a Pinkerton agent because they had a women's bureau, but then it got shut down. So somehow she ended up working for this woman Delphine, who runs a opium smuggling operation that used to be based in San Francisco, but as of this book is based in a place called Port Townsend, which is in Washington State, which is not a state yet at the time. But yeah, Washington Territory. I don't even know if that's a real city, but it's on the coast, so they get their ships and they smuggle the opium and they take it from, they usually take it to like Seattle, or they're getting kind of into taking it to Tacoma, and Delphine is planning on moving the operation headquarters or whatever, center of the operation to Tacoma, which is like, I think, the capital of Washington now. So hopefully, or I'm gonna sound dumb, but yeah, so basically Alma, the main character, is like, she likes to fight, she likes to get dirty, she spends most of the book cross-dressing as a man named Jack Camp, and she really enjoys doing that. Honestly, she's just like up to have a great time at all times, and she was just a lot of fun to spend time with. It was interesting because you're definitely like, the whole story is definitely about these criminals, and they're the people you're supposed to be rooting for. And they do shitty, awful things a lot. But there are other criminals who do shittier, awfuler things. So, I don't know, it's not, I think often read books that are in that kind of perspective. I think I usually reserve my interest in like fiction about criminals being terrible for movies, which I love. I love a good heist movie. I love a good movie that's just like Wild West, bad guys, gunslingers. And that's kind of what this book is. They're not cowboys, really, but there's aspects. Because of the time period and the place. So, yeah, I don't know. I thought it was fun. It was, very descriptive of a lot of things. Like Alma is interesting. It felt kind of, I don't think it's part of a series, but the book feels definitely like it could be. And not in a way where it's, I don't know, it's not like you go into it and you don't know what's going on, like you might if you accidentally read the second or third book of a series. But it's like, Alma at least has a lot of story prior to this book, and you kind of know that she's going to continue having a lot of story and adventures afterwards, so it feels like you've kind of been dropped into something in that sense. There's also like several explicit sex scenes I just thought I'd mention. Alma is bisexual, and so she's kind of, well, there's a couple of different characters that she's interested in the story, and of course there's the whole cross-dressing element, which I enjoyed, because I always like a good woman pretends to be man story, and it's kind of interesting too, because it felt to me like Alma as a character is pretty queer, like, yeah, but also I felt like gender-wise, just because of the time period, if she were living 150 years later, might identify otherwise than just as a woman, but that's not really gone into in any detail, but it felt to me personally like that was an aspect that was kind of happening. I didn't find the story that interesting. I kind of never cared that much as to whether they were gonna successfully, you know, like, turn the lawman's attention onto this other smuggler and get, you know, and have him get arrested for everything that they did. And, like, you know, I never really cared that much as to whether they were going to be successful, but I still, you know, I still found it enjoyable to listen to, and I was always just kind of like, yeah, like, what's going to happen next? I don't know. So I would recommend it if that sounds interesting to you, but it's not like everything I was hoping it would be, but it was like some of those things, so that's okay. Look, it matches my shirt. This is Monkshood by Ellis Peters, which I have finished reading. It is the third chronicle of Brother Cadfael. And an awesome friend of mine sent me books 3, 4, and 5 in the mail one day suddenly. So yeah, super cool of her. Yeah, so this third book, obviously I've read the first two. I guess I read them both last year. And they're it's a mystery series about a Benedictine monk in the 12th century in England. Although actually this has maps, and yeah, their abbey is in England, but it's practically in Wales. They're very close to Wales. Which you're not going to be able to see this. I suppose that's something you would know if you're English and you know where Shropshire is, but if you're from anywhere else, you're like, what the fuck was that noise? Alright, but anyway, these books they're really sweet, they're delightful, I enjoy them a lot. I like them for the murder mysteries and also for the, just the element of, like, the period piece element, I guess, because she did a lot of research, as far as I can tell. And I don't know how far I want to go into what this is about. Someone gets poisoned, and Cadfael realizes very quickly that he was poisoned with monkshood, or with a concoction that Cadfael made using monkshood, which is a poisonous plant. No shit. Why am I even telling you that? Of course, it's a poison made from a poisonous plant. Shock. But anyway, and there are several suspects, but the law is kind of like, oh, it was probably his son that he just disinherited, and Cadfael becomes convinced pretty quickly it was not, so he's kind of trying to figure out who really did it, while also evading the sheriff and keeping this kid away from them. So I thought it was very nice, and I'm super glad that my friend sent it to me, because it was just so fun and exciting to get books out of nowhere in the mail and have more options of what to read, because I still can't go to the library. So I'm kind of stuck with whatever's on Libby and what I own, which, unlike a lot of booktubers, I don't have like 100 books on my shelves that I've never read, so it's fine. But yeah, so this was really, really, really nice. And also it's kind of a Christmas mystery, because it's set like a couple of weeks begins at least like a couple of weeks before the Christmas feast, and they do have Christmas on this. I mean, it's like, you know, it's nice. I don't know, I don't think there's a ton to say about it. It's not like there's not like that much like incredible depth to it or anything. There's some funny stuff towards the end with who's the abbot. Like, there's a whole thing too, because I mean, there is continuity with the other books, and there are reoccurring other characters, and so it was funny to see Prior Robert kind of get disappointed in the end on wanting to become the new abbot, and somebody else is sent to do it instead. I'm curious to see what that guy is going to be like, because we don't know anything about him, and maybe he's going to be particularly strict. We have no idea. But this was nice. And of course, as soon as I showed it to my sister that I'm reading a book named Monkshood, she was just like, Wolfsbane! And we had to, you know, remember that whole thing. Like, the one thing Harry Potter taught me, right, was that Monkshood, Aconite, and Wolfsbane are all the same plant. Thanks, Harry Potter. That was useful in my life, I'm sure, ever. But yeah, so I'm definitely going to continue reading the series. I know I was kind of, like, not sure with the first couple of books whether I would bother or not. But I mean, I might as well. At least so far, I'm enjoying it. And obviously, like I said, my friend sent me the next 2 books as well. So I'm at least going to read those. Like, why not? I read Artemis Fowl by Eoin Colfer. Possibly Eoin Colfer. I don't know. Let's go with Eoin. So, yeah, this is not really, look at how shiny it is, first of all. Not really the kind of book I read, but, see, the thing is, when I was a kid, I really liked Artemis Fowl. And by kid, I guess I mean in middle school, because this book was published in 2001. But whatever, I liked Artemis Fowl. It was like, it was for kids younger than me, even when I was reading it at the beginning, but like, it was fun. It had a uniqueness to it. The main character is a 12-year-old millionaire genius criminal mastermind. So, when I found out Disney was making a movie, well, I was worried because 10 years ago I would have been excited, but now I'm just like, don't trust. You know, I saw what they did to Percy Jackson, and what are they going to do to Artemis Fowl? And of course they ruined it. I mean, I watched the movie last week with a friend of mine. We had a blast on Discord, but it wasn't good. And it especially wasn't good when compared to the source material. They changed, like, Artemis's whole motivation. It was stupid, okay? The changes they made were all super unnecessary. And, you know, and okay, so this book, let's just talk about the book. Because watching the movie, it made me think, like, that was a cute book. And I know my sister has a copy buried within her bookshelf. So I'm gonna, like, excavate it and give it a read for the first time in a decade at least. And it is a really sweet book. I mean, it's very much a kid's book. But it's fun. It's got this unique, like, idea of the fairies living underground, having really high technology, and kind of like having, you know, their whole society being like they need to stay away from the humans and to stay secret. And of course Artemis, as this very strange criminal mastermind child, I like the dichotomy kind of between him coming up with these brilliant schemes to get money from the elves, basically, and versus the moments in the story when you're reminded that he is a kid, and just kind of, I guess, the pathos or whatever of, say, the scenes with his mother, who's just dead in the movie for, like, no reason. She's just dead. I was like, well, this is stupid, because, you know, and then I read the book again and I'm like, actually, it's so fucking stupid. It's so Dear Kenneth Branagh, why? I mean, I'm not assuming, I shouldn't assume he made all these decisions. He was just the director, but, like, dear people who make these decisions, why? But yeah, this is just, it's a fun book, and I recall that the series is fun, and, like, Artemis is just this shitty child who, you know, is also super mega smart, and there's just the general weirdness of how he's always ordering Butler around, because he's this, like, Butler's his bodyguard and manservant, but also Butler is ginormous and terrifying, and Artemis is like 12. You know, it's funny, and I remember, like, you know, it was fun to read this again. I like all the characters a lot, especially Holly and Root and Foley and Mulch. They're all just a ton of fun. Foley, I had forgotten this, but he wears a tinfoil hat. That's hilarious. I don't know why that wasn't in the movie. Yeah, and I love Root and his, like, cursing and his always getting really angry and his, like, disgusting fungus cigars. I honestly want to keep reading the series, but, like, I can't because we don't have the second book. We do have the third. You know, and of course, I also want to read a real book for adults, but, you know, maybe when I can get to the library again, I'll think about getting the second book. But this was just, like, honestly, I really do recommend reading the books if you never have and you like kids fantasy. It's very simple, but I still think it's a lot of fun. And it's just, I don't know, I really like the way it's all put together, and it's funny and it's creative. And if you happen to watch the movie without having read the books, I don't think you're necessarily going to know how funny and creative the books are. So, okay, now, we're nearing the end of June as I film this, and I probably will not finish reading another book this month. So, I therefore want to bring back my trusty old books that I plan on reading in 2020 list. And, you know, check where I am. I have read 9 of these books, so I am actually like 1 book behind where I would want to be at the halfway point of the year, which is the end of June. However, I am starting one of them, like, today probably. I just don't think I'll have it finished by the end of the month. And it's getting to be a bit difficult because I don't have access to a lot of these books. Because, like, the way for me to have access to books right now is either I own it already, so, okay, I'm working on reading those, or I could get it on Libby, but I only want to get audiobooks on Libby, and I've kind of exhausted that resource as far as this list is concerned. Or I can get it from my library, but I haven't tried doing the curbside pickup of books thing yet, and the thing is, it has to be specifically at my library. They're not doing interlibrary loan. And I don't know how long this is going to last. I don't know at what point this might open up again, because honestly, like, they keep opening things up in the state and moving further into opening up. So maybe the library will be open normally again soon. I don't know. But there's only a few books on this list that the library, my library, actually has. The other ones I was just gonna get, you know, through interlibrary loan. That was the plan. It still is. We're hoping we can do it by the end of the year. I mean, I've got half the year left, so it'll probably be fine. I'm just worrying out loud. But yeah, so it's kind of put a bit of a damper in, like, my ability to just read whichever of these I feel like reading at a given moment. Because if I'm like, fuck, I'd really love to read Babylon Berlin right now, I can't. Unless I buy it, but I don't really want to do that. I'd actually tried to buy Babylon Berlin, but that didn't work for some reason. Okay. Anyway. So, I am 1 book behind, but it'll be fine. I'm still pretty much on track for finishing all 20 books by the end of the year. Very exciting. Yes. I'm also still really hyped to read, like, all of these, so it's working out great so far.